Hello. So I missed yesterday, so maybe I'll have to double up at the end or something like this. But I wanted to come in today and talk a little bit about post-traumatic stress disorder and how it's important for us to heal mentally, spiritually, as a collective before we can really build the trust, before we can really build the platforms, before we can do a lot of those things. I think a theme that is very clear for me when I interact with Black people all around the world, which I do make it a point to do that everywhere I go, and every experience of Blackness is so unique. I quite remember, actually it was in Ghana, there was a forum held by a Sierra Leonean woman, actually Cornell graduate, who did a film called Too African to be American, Too American to be African. And during that discussion, we actually had some people from, I was on a panel, and we had some people from, I believe, Denmark and France, like some African people from Denmark and France. And afterwards, I ended up speaking with them. And something that really was interesting for me was them talking about how important it was for them to be seen as Parisian or seen as Danish, right? And these are women whose parents are African, whose parents immigrated to those places, and they've lived there their whole lives, and that's their reality. It's France, is Denmark, and just hearing the story about like what it means to really be in a place and own that identity, and then I compare that a lot to and at least in that place, being a part of that framework where your parents are contributing, they're part of the country, but you are never seen as part of it. And I compare that to the African American experience of literally building a nation and not being given full citizenship, even still to this day, still being disenfranchised, still being seen as less American. And then you go to the Caribbean, you go to countries like Brazil, where they've created a caste, and basically the darker you are, the lower you are, and just thinking about all of the trauma related to just trying to be Black in a specific place, and the trauma that's passed on generation after generation about what it means to be Black. I'll never forget in Louisiana, again, as I said in the first video, Louisiana was my first time truly being immersed in a place that was 100% American Black, where the people genuinely saw themselves fully as American and had no, at least the people that I was engaging had no interest really in connecting with the continent, and understandably, for the reasons are fraught, but understandably they were generations disconnected. They had built their own culture and identities in the Southern space. Their relationship to the South was such that they had built it, they owned it. There was no reason to claim any other place. They don't speak none of y'all African languages. They would tell me, we don't speak them languages, we don't know what y'all be saying. So we don't eat that food, we don't know what y'all be cooking. And so that experience was like eye-opening. And a student of mine who actually, I had a conversation with him, and the things that he was saying about what it means to be Black and what it means to be white. I had planned a college tour back when I subscribed wholly to the talented Teth ideology. I've since evolved from there, but I believe it has merit still in terms of the value of lifting while climbing. I was doing a college tour, and one of the students, who unfortunately was not going to be able to go, was saying that, he didn't even see the point anyway, because like college is something that white people do. And even when you get a degree, it's only as valuable as you are white. And this is like a 12-year-old telling me, like, basically your college degree is only as useful as your proximity to whiteness, which is not true. So, I mean, for him to have that kind of deep analysis, that's something to me that had been passed down from him of like, yeah, you can get a degree and maybe you'll do all right. Maybe you'll get an office job. Maybe you'll be something in the world, but maybe not. And honestly, the closer you get to white people, the better your chances of being, let's say, something or making money, or etc. And, I had no comeback for that. But again, to me, that was an example of like trauma, like things being passed down generation after generation, people fighting and seeking representation, seeking recourse, and after a while just deciding like, hey, some things are just not for us in this country, and that's just what it is, and not to say that's everyone's mentality, but it was just like one type of mentality that shows the trauma of colonialism, or the trauma of slavery. And then being here, and I go to, for example, Abidjan, and I think of Abidjan as a really fun city, in terms of, not fun, sorry, a really interesting city. I mean, it is fun, but it's high walls, closed, post-war, so post-conflict, sorry. So it's not the same energy, but one thing that stands out for me in Abidjan is like everyone speaks French. There is no local language, right? I mean, obviously people know where their grandparents are from, the tribes their grandparents are from, things like that. But on the average, the idea that there is a local language is seen as divisive. And I see that as trauma. Like, yes, I understand the history, the ethnic tension, and, the role that the French colonies played in sort of trying to make French the standard that everyone has to aspire to, and French this unifying factor, when in some ways it's also a very divisive thing to think that like a part of your identity must necessarily be steeped in someone else's history, someone else's identity, essentially trauma. And so it's like, what does healing from the trauma of the things that have been inflicted on us, and the things that have been inflicted on even our decision trees, like how we make decisions, how we think forward. And I'm so grateful to be alive in this moment where we are talking a lot more about mental health, and we are talking about doing the inner work, and we are talking about, self and breaking generational curses. And these are things that I believe that we've always talked about in different ways, but now I feel like is less taboo and it's a more open. And, God bless, Gen Z and their hashtag normalize this, and et cetera, et cetera. And I think that the mental health piece is a very important part of how we build Black globally. In order for us to see value in each other, we have to first see value in ourselves. One of my, favorite verses in the Bible talks about how we need to love God and then love our neighbors as ourselves. And I feel like one thing, so Michael Todd, Pastor Todd, one thing that he said that really stood out to me is that you cannot love your neighbor as yourself if you do not love yourself. If the love that you have for yourself is toxic, then that's the love that you're going to give to your neighbor. If the way that you value yourself, your language, your clothing, your presentation, your skin color is negative, that's how you regard other people with similar features or with similar backgrounds or similar histories. And so I think that we can talk about spirituality and the way that indigenous people have always been spiritual. So the people who own a land have always been close to the land, have always been close to spirit, to God. But so this idea of loving God, I feel like, is not too far away in the African and Black context, no matter where we are. Even in the doldrums of like anti-religious Europe, you will still find that the thick of the, the God-fearing folk or the spiritual folk are people of color, Black, etc. That, aside, when it comes to loving ourselves and loving our neighbors, as long as our neighbor is someone who it looks like us, sounds like us, that relationship can be, not always, but can be very fraught. And so we have to ask ourselves, is it that we don't love ourselves, right? Like how do we show ourselves love? How do we reinforce our own identities, our own beliefs about ourselves, about what we're capable of doing, about the value of the things that we produce from our hearts and our minds? And so for me, this work starts with individuals deciding, these are the set of things that have happened before me, but today I break that curse. And I break that curse with being intentional about how I move forward in my life, what I prioritize, how I, engage people, how I think about, myself, the way I look, my language, my food way, the way I dress, is it positive self-talk or is it negative self-talk? Am I optimistic about what is possible for myself and therefore for my people? Or is it kind of like I'm operating in scarcity, or I'm operating in limitation, I'm operating in the standards of a previous, let's say, something that was passed on to me previously. So yeah, I mean, self-love and love of neighbor will go a long way in the Build Black Globally movement until we can identify our trauma and see the ways in which that trauma has been passed down generationally and make a decision that we are ending that, like that trauma ends with us and we're moving in a completely different direction. Until we can do that, it's always going to be this kind of tension. So yeah, let me know. I'm really excited. There are a number of like black mental health and wellness spaces that have cropped up all around the world, and beyond just therapy, right? Like, not that therapy is a standard, but beyond therapy, just seeking other types of reform, seeking counsel, sound therapy, just like different things that we're doing to really center ourselves and to be one with ourselves, and to love ourselves as individuals, and then eventually love our neighbor and our people. So yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts as usual.